Carrie had always felt like a bird in a gilded cage. Her mother, though loving to a fault, had a way of smothering her with affection and rules that seemed more designed to clip her wings than help her fly. It wasn't malice, but a crippling fear of the world that drove her mother to keep Carrie under a watchful eye, creating an invisible tether that choked and restrained. Carrie's home was filled with warmth and love, but every "I love you" seemed to draw the walls in closer. Carrie felt suffocated, not by the dry, arid air of New Mexico or by the relentless sun that painted everything in a golden hue. No, it was the ever-present weight of her mother's love that bore down on her, a cage of concern and care that felt stifling. From the outside, their small, cozy home, surrounded by a white picket fence and a garden that bloomed year-round, was a testament to a mother's dedication. Their neighbors often marveled at how close the mother-daughter duo seemed, always together, always in sync. But only Carrie knew the truth of the matter. Every hug, every kiss was a chain, linking her irrevocably to a life she felt increasingly disconnected from. As she grew, Carrie's soul thirsted for the world beyond her window, a world she was only allowed to experience through books, movies, and clandestine internet sessions once her mother was sound asleep. She fantasized about life beyond the suffocatingly neat hedges of her home, where adventure, danger, and real life awaited. On her 17th birthday, Carrie decided she'd had enough. She couldn't bear another moment in that house, where every well-intentioned gesture from her mother felt like another brick in the walls that imprisoned her. She began to revolt, a silent plea for understanding, for freedom. She'd sneak out to parties, the kinds of get-togethers she knew her mother would never approve of. She threw herself into these nights of freedom with abandon. There was the wild Halloween bash at her friend Dana's place, where she'd laughed and danced, surrounded by ghouls and goblins, feeling alive amidst the pretend dead. Then the New Year's Eve party at Mike's house, with its thrumming music and kids cheering in the new year, with plastic cups of cheap beer raised high. Each party was a patchwork of memory snippets of music, bursts of laughter, the thrill of a stolen kiss, a quick chug of a lukewarm beer, or a shared joint-making rounds. But amidst the revelry, Carrie felt a pang of sadness, knowing these fleeting moments were just that, fleeting. They were mere crumbs of the life she yearned for, and the thought of returning to her mother's stifling embrace filled her with a sense of desperate urgency. It wasn't her mother's love she resented. It was the love's restrictive hold, the way it tried to mold her into someone she wasn't. She wanted to experience life, make mistakes, and learn from them, not be kept from living. After returning from another late-night escapade, Carrie found her mother waiting up for her, worry evident in her eyes. The argument that ensued was volcanic. Carrie's frustration, long simmering beneath the surface, erupted in a barrage of accusations. She felt trapped, caged, suffocated by her mother's love. But her mother, tears streaming down her face, couldn't understand. To her, every act was out of love, every moment of concern born from the desire to protect her only child. She couldn't fathom why Carrie felt imprisoned by the very bonds she had nurtured. The night ended with Carrie storming out, the door slamming shut behind her, leaving behind a shattered home and a heartbroken mother. The weight of the world on her shoulders, she headed to yet another party, seeking solace in the raucous comfort of her peers. Little did she know that this would be the night that everything changed. The transition from that explosive argument to Carrie's awakening was nothing but a blur. A mix of vivid, disjointed memories, flashes of a wild party, blaring music, bodies too close to differentiate, and an array of substances passed around in the name of freedom and rebellion, and then darkness. Carrie's eyes fluttered open to an oppressive blackness, the kind that seemed to press in from all sides. Disoriented, she tried to sit up, her head pounding in the stillness. Panic set in as her hands patted down her body, finding a strange suit hugging her form, a suit she had no memory of donning. Her heart raced, her breaths quick and shallow, as she tried to piece together how she had gotten here, wherever. Here was. Straining to adjust to the darkness, Carrie realized she was in some kind of cave. The air was thick and heavy, making every breath feel like drawing water into her lungs. The ground beneath her was hard, and uneven panic quickly morphed into terror as she tried to stand, her bare feet vulnerable against the cold, stony floor. As Carrie stumbled through the cave, the darkness was a physical presence around her, a shroud that clung to her and seemed to whisper threats in her ear. As she walked, her feet ached, the cold of the cave floor biting into her skin, making each step a study in perseverance. She was on the verge of succumbing to despair when she tripped over something on the ground. Falling forward, she braced for impact, but her hands met with something soft, yet sturdy. Blinking in confusion, Carrie felt around the object, her fingers recognizing the shape of a backpack. Her heart skipped a beat. With trembling hands, she unzipped it, and her touch recognized the items within even before she saw them in the dim light. Water, a cereal bar, an emergency flare, and a snorkel. They were basic, yet in her situation, they were everything. And then her fingers brushed a piece of paper, and she pulled it out, squinting to read the familiar handwriting in the low light. Love, Mom. Mom? Carrie's voice was hoarse, a cracked whisper that couldn't push through the heavy air. She spun around, her heart pounding so loud it echoed off the walls. Mom, are you here? She was met with silence, the kind that seemed to mock her with its emptiness. Questions flooded her mind, each more frantic than the last. How did this get here? Was her mother here? Watching her somehow? Was this her way of reaching out? But that didn't make sense. None of this made sense. The rational part of Carrie's mind was screaming that it wasn't possible, yet the undeniable proof was right there in her hands, tangible and solid. The silence was suffocating, and the weight of her isolation pressed in on her from all sides. With the backpack strap around her shoulder, Carrie felt a small piece of her resolve harden. Her mother wasn't here. Wherever this bag had come from, it was clear she was still alone in this nightmare. Gritting her teeth, she ignited the flare with shaking hands, its sudden bright red light casting eerie shadows on the cave walls. The path before her was still a mystery, a winding route through the belly of the earth. But now she had light. Now she could see. And though the snorkel hanging around her neck was a foreboding omen of what lay ahead, Carrie squared her shoulders. Her mother's love, overbearing or not, had somehow penetrated this hellish place, giving her the tools she needed to move forward. With a deep, steadying breath, Carrie stepped into the unknown, the part of her that was still a rebellious teenager, sparking a defiant flame in her chest. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew she wouldn't, just stay trapped in this darkness. She had to move forward, toward whatever awaited her in the depths of the cave. The flare cast a flickering, uneasy light, creating looming shadows, which danced across the rough walls of the cave. The air was thicker here, heavy with the scent of earth and something else, something dank and otherworldly. Carrie moved cautiously, her free hand skimming the cool wall to guide her. Each step forward made her heart pound against her ribs like a battle drum, echoing a silent mantra. Survive, survive, survive. As she ventured deeper into the cave, the terrain became more treacherous. The ground under her feet was no longer smooth. It was jagged and uneven, causing her to stumble more than once. Her breaths came in short gasps, the humidity making every inhale feel like drawing breath through a wet cloth. That's when she saw it, a tunnel so narrow she knew she would have to crawl. The flare's light couldn't penetrate the complete darkness within, and the thought of going in there was like a physical weight in her stomach. But there was no other way forward. Clenching her teeth, Carrie steeled herself and started to crawl, the backpack dragging behind her in the dirt. The space was claustrophobically tight, the earth pressing in from all sides. She could hear her own movements scuffling in the oppressive silence, a sound punctuated only by her increasingly labored breaths through the snorkel. And then, the worst happened. The tunnel began to fill with water. It seeped in slowly at first, cold and ominous, before it started to pour, swirling around her in a frenzy, tugging at her like 100 greedy hands. Panic laced up her spine as the water level rose, her breaths coming fast and shallow through the snorkel. The flare sizzled out, robbing her of light, leaving her in a darkness that felt like a living entity, swallowing her whole. She was halfway through. There was no going back. The need to escape was a primal force, and it drove her forward, her fingers clawing through the water and against the rough stone beneath. The water was up to her chin, quickly creeping up the side of her face. She pushed on, driven by nothing but sheer terror and the will to survive. The darkness was total, and in it, her mother's voice emerged from the depths of her memory, a beacon in the consuming black. "Come back to me, baby. Please come home." Motivated by that voice, she clawed forward until her hands breached the surface, finding open air. With a mixture of desperation and renewed energy, Carrie forced her body through the last stretch of the oppressive tunnel, emerging into a dimly lit space. Her hands were raw, her fingertips bloody from her frantic escape, and her body ached from the cramped journey. But she was out. Carrie collapsed, coughing and gasping onto the ground, the sensation of solid earth beneath her, both alien and comforting. Her whole body was shaking, adrenaline still coursing through her veins like fire. Above, instead of the starry sky she expected, there was only an expanse of twilight, an endless dusk that added to the surreality of her situation. It took her a while to gather herself, to process that she had survived. With a heavy breath, she grasped the dirt, grounding herself in the reality that she was still here, she was still alive. Her mother's voice had carried her through the darkness. Whether it was a hallucination or something else, it didn't matter. It had saved her. Now, Carrie stood at the mouth of the cave, a new resolve stealing within her. Ahead was an entirely different challenge, a forest that towered dauntingly before her, its trees like silent sentinels guarding the secrets within. With no other option, Carrie stepped from the darkness of the cave into the eerie half-light, ready to face whatever came next. As Carrie stumbled into the forest, her body still quivering from her ordeal in the caves, she was met with a world so starkly different it could have been another planet. Towering redwoods stretched towards the sky, their tops lost in a gentle mist that diffused the eternal twilight above. The ground wasn't the loamy soil of a normal forest. It was sand, fine and soft, a stark contrast to the unforgiving rock of the caves. Shaking, Carrie collapsed beside a mysterious roaring fire that seemed to have sprung from nowhere. Its warmth was an immediate relief, thawing the cold fear that had settled in her bones. Beside it, another anomaly, a book bag identical to her previous one. It was surreal, like a lifeline thrown by an unseen hand. Inside, she found a water bottle, another cereal bar, a handgun, and a pair of shoes. Shoes that looked suspiciously like the pair she'd cherished back when she was 14. The note was there too, the same handwriting, the same message. Love, Mom. Tears blurred her vision as she read the note, the signature a haunting echo of a past she couldn't fully grasp. How was this possible? Was her mother here, watching over her, guiding her through this nightmare with these small beacons of hope? "Mom?" she called out, her voice a mix of hope and heartache. It cracked through the stillness of the forest, returning to her ears as nothing more than a hollow sound, a reminder of her solitude. Carrie's hands trembled as they closed around the fabric of the bag, almost expecting it to vanish, proving its existence to be just another cruel trick of her mind. But it remained, solid and real. The gun inside felt heavy, its metallic surface cold against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of the fire. It was a burden she hadn't asked for, the gun bearing a weight beyond its physical form. The reality of her situation settled in with a daunting clarity. She was entirely alone, with a loaded gun as her silent companion. The shoes brought a different kind of discomfort, stirring a nostalgic ache in her chest. They were an echo of a simpler time, a ghost of her past. Slipping them on, she felt a resurgence of her younger, more hopeful self, mixing with the jaded survivalist she had become. They fit perfectly, as though she were stepping back into a former life, one that didn't involve eerie woods and unknown terrors. Hunger gnawed at her, insistent and grounding amidst the chaos. She tore into the cereal bar, the action mechanical. Her thoughts were fixated on the note, on the implications of its existence. She couldn't fathom who else could have known so much, who else could have provided such specific comforts from her past, except her mother. But the how and why tangled in her mind, forming an unsolvable knot. The fire crackled, a lively contrast to the deathly stillness around her. The scent of burning wood mingled with another smell. Cookies. It was faint but unmistakable, tugging at the fringes of her memory. Home-baked cookies, laughter, a sense of safety fragments of a distant past that seemed like another lifetime. Was it real, or just another layer of this unending nightmare? Drawing her knees to her chest, Carrie allowed herself a moment, just a moment, to pretend that she was enveloped in her mother's protective embrace, rather than caught in a web of horrors. With the fire's glow as her only source of comfort, she braced herself for the challenges that lay ahead, the gun a heavy reminder of the reality awaiting her with the rising sun. Despite the fear gnawing at her insides, sleep, that elusive entity, mercifully claimed her at last. She lay curled beside the dying embers, the forest a canopy of shadows, the silence a deceptive lullaby. In the cocoon of the forest, time seemed distorted. The sun's journey across the sky halted, bathing the woodland in perpetual twilight. The dim light, trapped eternally between day and night, cast the world in shades of blue and gray, the colors muted and dreamlike. Carrie awoke not to the kiss of dawn, but to this endless dusk, the atmosphere around her thick with an otherworldly quality. The shadows lay undisturbed, stretching between the trees like silent specters. She stirred, her body stiff from the cold ground, the fire beside her reduced to smoldering coals. The world felt suspended, caught in a moment that neither progressed nor receded, and for a second, the eerie stillness fooled her into a state of deceptive calm. The forest around her, with its towering trees, seemed to breathe in the gloom, alive in a way that both awed and terrified her. It was then she noticed the path, a phenomenon within the enigma of the forest. The lights, nestled among the roots and rocks, didn't flicker or shine brightly, but glowed with a steady force, like the pulse of some mysterious, living thing. They created a luminous trail through the woodland, their origin and purpose as unclear as everything else in this unsettling place. With a weary breath, Carrie steadied herself. The gun, tucked securely into her bodysuit, was a cold reassurance against her skin, a reminder of the danger she still faced. She clung to the lifeline the path provided, allowing it to guide her deeper into the forest's heart, where twilight reigned sovereign. Her progress was slow, each step an act of willpower. She rationed her food meticulously, the hunger a dull companion amidst her swirling thoughts. Carrie couldn't help but feel she was a stranger here, in a world that didn't operate by human rules. But the path understood, its lights a silent companionship amidst the solitude, leading her forward in the surreal half-light. Despite her exhaustion and the forest's oppressive strangeness, a part of her marveled at the haunting beauty around her, the way the limited light played off the leaves, the unearthly stillness of the air, the sense of being entirely removed from everything real and tangible. This ethereal woodland didn't adhere to the laws of nature she knew. It was both enthralling and menacing, a beautiful purgatory on the edge of reality. And as she moved forward, Carrie felt it, all the fear, the awe, the desperate hope, and carried it with her, step by measured step, deeper into the embrace of the eternal twilight. As Carrie spent more and more time in this twilight, she lost track of time. Days melded into one another, each indistinguishable in the perpetual dusk. The forest was quiet, but for the occasional sound that skittered just out of sight, leaving her heart hammering. Sleep was a distant memory. Her body moved mechanically, powered by anxiety and the will to survive. As her provisions dwindled, desperation crept in. She berated herself for not rationing better, for the panic that clawed at her throat with each step. The gun felt heavy against her spine, a morbid reminder that she had an out, should she choose to take it. That thought was still swirling in her mind when she stumbled into a clearing. With a cry of frustration, she drew the gun and fired blindly at a nearby tree, the report loud in the stillness. The bullet hit, and sap oozed from the wound in the wood, thick and brown, smelling strongly of cookies. But not just any cookies. This was the smell of her favorite cookie, a cookie she could almost never refuse, chocolate chip. Driven by thirst, hunger, and overwhelming exhaustion, she almost couldn't control herself. Carrie approached and drank deeply, immediately gagging on the cloying sweetness. But she couldn't stop. It was wet, and it was there, and she needed it. After consuming her fill of this brown sap, Carrie moved along the path, but now finding herself having to stop every few feet to breathe, her face and body feeling hot as a pressure built up in the back of her skull and a mysterious humming filled her ears. Then suddenly, the world shifted. The trees seemed to breathe, looming in and pulling back with each shallow breath she took. The forest around Carrie undulated, warping under the weight of her delirium. The once sturdy redwoods now whispered secrets in a language made of shadows and fear. The air thickened, pressing in on her, every rustle and crack, a sinister giggle hidden in the underbrush. It was as if the forest had swallowed her whole, digesting her sanity in slow, agonizing churns. From this living nightmare, a grotesque version of herself materialized. It was her, yet laden with every mistake she'd ever made, every self-loathing thought she'd ever harbored. Its eyes were gaping voids, yet they bore into her soul, blackened mirrors reflecting nothing and everything. Her doppelganger's mouth twisted into a sneer, a silent mockery that said, "You can't escape yourself." It advanced, its movements a sickening mimicry of her own. With every step, it shed fragments of what might have been Carrie's humanity, leaving a trail of despair in its wake. It was getting closer, close enough that she could smell the sour stench of her own sweat on its skin. Panic clawed up her throat, blinding her, deafening her to everything but her heartbeat. The doppelganger reached for her, fingers stretching like the branches of the distorted trees around them. Trapped, with her back against the cold, judging bark of a redwood, Carrie's survival instincts screamed. She couldn't end like this, not at the hands of her own despair. Trembling, she raised the gun, her last lifeline, pressing the cold muzzle against the forehead of this entity that wore her face. Her finger hesitated on the trigger, every sinew in her body taut with desperation. Could she destroy this piece of herself? The doppelganger smiled, a gruesome confirmation. With a cry that tore from her very soul, she pulled the trigger. The bullet catapulted through the twisted Carrie, its echo ripping through the forest. Her nightmare shattered like glass, fragments of herself raining down, only to be swallowed by the darkness. Exhaustion, heavier than the sky, crushed her. Her knees buckled as she sank to the forest floor. The world spun, a carousel out of control, and within the whirlwind, she heard it a lullaby, a plea woven from love and memories. Carrie, come back. When she awoke, it was to the sight of the forest's edge. The hallucinations were gone, her mind clear, though her body felt hollow and spent. The surreal journey through the woods had ended, giving way to the next unforeseeable chapter. As she stepped out of the forest, the ground beneath her feet solid and real, Carrie braced herself for whatever lay ahead, the echo of her mother's voice a lingering balm on the raw edges of her spirit. Emerging from the forest's embrace, Carrie stood at the edge of a vast expanse of water. It was unlike any lake she had ever seen. The water was a brilliant, shimmering blue, reflecting the sky so perfectly that the horizon seemed to disappear. It was as if the world had opened up, offering a surreal escape from the dense, pressing reality of the forest she had just endured. But it was the stillness that unnerved her the most. The water was motionless, not a single ripple disturbing its surface, and the sky above mirrored its calm. The clouds also were frozen in place, creating a scene so serene it felt painted. Everything was silent, the air itself seeming to wait in anticipation. In the heart of the lake, incongruous and inexplicable, sat the small, familiar shape of her childhood home. It was a jarring sight, the normalcy of the structure wholly out of place in the center of this bizarre tableau. It looked exactly as she remembered, albeit weathered. The porch was slightly caved in, moss and other greenery claiming the wooden structure in a slow, persistent invasion. And then she heard it, a voice, drifting across the water like a whisper carried on a breeze. "Come home, please, come home." The voice, her mother's voice, tugged at something deep within her. It was the voice of comfort, of Sunday mornings and soft laughter and warmth. But it was out of place here, in this strange, still world, which felt like a dream, within a dream. Carrie's resolve cemented in an instant. She had to reach that house. Bracing herself for the icy touch of water, she took a step and then stumbled in confusion. Her foot didn't sink into liquid as expected. Instead, it met solid resistance. Tentatively, she tested her weight against it. The surface of the lake, impossibly, held firm beneath her. She was walking on water. Disbelief warred with acceptance within her. The rules of reality had long since been left behind. But this felt like a leap, even within the madness she had endured. But then her mother's voice called again, more urgent now. "Just come home, baby. I'm so sorry." Carrie steeled herself. One foot in front of the other, she began the surreal trek across the lake, each step an act of faith against the evidence of her own senses. As she walked, a thought struck her, absurd in its normalcy. "Carrie of Nazareth," she muttered to herself. The words a lifeline to a humor that felt distant and foreign. She almost believed she could hear laughter, soft and sad, carried on the wind. Reaching the porch of the house was like surfacing from a deep dive, a return to a reality that was at once familiar and newly alien. On the porch, another book bag awaited her, the sight so expected now that she could only numbly acknowledge the contents inside, the water bottle, the cereal bar. But instead of finding shoes or a gun, the mysterious items the bag contained this time were her old house key and a VHS tape labeled "Play Me." The house, her home, stood as a silent sentinel. The door creaked ominously as she pushed it open, revealing a hollowed interior that spoke of years of neglect. It was all shadows and dust inside, empty and forlorn, except for the TV and VCR that seemed out of time in their ordinariness, the only objects untouched by the decay around them. With trembling hands, Carrie inserted the tape into the VCR. It sprung to life with a mechanical whir. This hauntingly normal sound made her heart ache. The screen flickered to life, and images began to play, a fast forward through chaos. Bombings, war, and famine flashed across the screen, interspersed with moments of tender humanity, a mother holding her child, people rallying around one another, the raw beauty of untouched wilderness. It was a cacophony of the best and worst of human existence, culminating in a simple, handwritten sign that read, "The End." As the tape clicked off, the silence was deafening. Carrie was left staring at the blank screen, the images seared into her mind's eye. But she had little time to ponder, for a new sound broke the stillness, the unmistakable creak of floorboards. She wasn't alone. Turning, she faced the new impossibility of her situation. Figures loomed in the doorway, their forms massive and intimidating, yet their presence almost ineffably gentle. 6 of them, featureless, as though someone had cut humanoid shapes out of the fabric of night itself. Panic, raw and blinding, seized her. The gun was in her hand before she could think, but the figures made no move. They were just there, watching, waiting, and then one stepped forward, a gesture of peace or surrender in its stance. Her mind raced. This was it. This was the moment of understanding, of revelation. All of it, the journey, the trials, had led to this. And yet comprehension danced just beyond her reach, maddeningly elusive. It was then that the figure moved its hand. This startled Carrie, who reactively pulled the trigger. A loud bang echoed and rang through her ears as the world slipped away into darkness once more. Carrie's last conscious thought was a whisper in the void, her mother's voice, warm and sad. "Fight, baby, don't give up. God, please, just let her come back to me." She awoke to the stifling darkness of the caves, the journey reset, her memories a jumble of half-remembered dreams. The voice beckoned her onwards, and with nothing else to hold on to, Carrie began to move forward, searching for answers in the depths of the earth.